Y'all know the phrase, to be the man, you got to beat the man. That's exactly what South Carolina State did, and I think they may be the new kings of HBCU football. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, Sam Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. And if you're new to FanDuel, $5 will get you $150 back in bonus bets for free. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. We'll wrap up today's episode with a few games that you need to watch that are not our game of the week. And if you are a little bit behind, so to speak, maybe you missed the fact that Thursday, South Carolina State versus North Carolina Central was our game of the week. So we did our game of the week episode a little bit early. It wouldn't make sense to come on here the next day and preview it. It's already happened. Instead, we previewed it on Thursday and we will recap it partially on Friday. We'll come back on Monday and do it again because I doubt that there will be a bigger story in HBCU football that happens over Saturday. Instead, the biggest story will probably be South Carolina State's victory. We're going to take on the first aspect of it. I think they're the new kings in HBCU football. I partially feel a little bit disrespectful to Jackson State. I'm not going to lie. This was a difficult decision for me. And I don't even think it's recency bias. It's about the way that you knocked off the best team. I was very confident that North Carolina Central was the best team in Black college football. I genuinely was. I didn't think that this would be an easy game for them. I did think that they would probably prevail. And I think that's because I've seen them do it against more teams. I've seen them do it repeatedly, right? And I was probably underestimating South Carolina State a little bit solely based off of, right, like A&T, Delaware State. The Tennessee Tech game was still a big one for them. And I think they didn't quite have their footing in that first game against FAMU. So resumes I was looking at, and I wasn't just looking at the fact that this is an immensely talented team. And it's an offense that looks like it'll be impossible to stop, specifically through the air with the way that Eric Phoenix is rolling. On Monday, we'll come in and I'll tell you why I think that Eric Phoenix had his MEAC Offensive Player of the Year game against North Carolina Central. But when you look at the way that he attacks a defense, when you look at the way that Caden High and Smith Brown and Carter, when you look at the field stretching ability of South Carolina State, it doesn't feel like anybody's going to be able to stop it. Will they have that type of proficient offense every single game? No, right? Like eventually they'll probably have a bad game. If you're just playing the odds, it's going to happen. But I don't know if I'm pointing to somebody and saying they're going to stall it out. I don't know if I'm doing that. I don't know if I'm saying, yeah, it's going to stall out right here. No, it's just they may struggle one game because you can't have 100-yard receivers every week. You can't have Caden High go for 2 touchdowns every week. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be Caden High. It can be Carter. It can be Smith Brown. It could be anybody because they have so many weapons. It could be Ruffin. He looked good at the beginning of this game. Eric Phoenix and that wide receiving core knows how to stretch the offense, stretch the defense vertically and horizontally. Their ability to get beyond the safety on a consistent basis is amazing, and you saw it early in the game. I thought that the offense started with some deep shots, and typically you want to work medium and then build up to your deep shots, or typically that's how it happens, I should say. But that wasn't the case here. I thought they started attacking deep, over the top, repeatedly, very early in this game. This wasn't a situation where Phoenix had to gain comfort. So after hitting a couple of deep shots, then they started hitting a couple of hole shots, right? Then you started getting them on the sideline where it's about 15 yards deep. The safety can't come over in enough time, and the cornerback is too shallow. They were attacking everywhere that they needed to be, and it felt like anytime they needed a play, they would go get it. Did it have to be the wide receivers? No, it could have been Tony, right? Like you're looking at that shallow 5 to 7 area of the field. It was the tight ends. It was the tight, specifically 5, right? It was the tight end who was exploring that shallow part of the offense. If it was third and short, you didn't need to go get 15 yards. You didn't need to go attack somebody over the middle. It didn't matter where you went, but you didn't need to go do that. Instead, sometimes they would opt for that 5-yard throw. They would opt for that 7-yard throw. They would opt for that 3 yards in the catch and run. I think overall, South Carolina State just had too much speed. You see the beginning of the game, they were stretching the field. They were getting deep shots. It was looking good. And then you look at that one touchdown by Caden High. He had 2 touchdowns on the night, but it was that last one that he scored. And essentially, it was the one that put the game out of reach. It was the one that put South Carolina State at 24 points. He caught the ball real shallow. It couldn't have been more than a 10-yard catch. And he just hit another gear. You seen it. People looked like they were in position, but then they weren't. They were able to get a hand on him, right? Like they barely would have got him if this was flag. But Caden High is so explosive. You see it. You see it when watching him, whether it's that play where it's catch and run, whether it's stretching down the field, whether it's just going 15 yards on an in route. They get so much separation. I focus on High because he led the charge with 8 catches for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. But you could easily look at any of the other guys, Ruffin, Smith Brown, Carter. They were phenomenal. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball. Defensively, they gave up a couple of big plays, 3 big plays, 2 catches and 1 run. Outside of that, they were stalling out North Carolina Central on a regular basis. And I know that this was a 24-21 score, but honestly, South Carolina State was 2 scores better than North Carolina Central that day. They just genuinely were. They had a turnover on downs deep in their own end zone. They had an interception. I think that was in their territory too, or in Central Territory, excuse me. Both of those were in Central Territory. They were much better than the Eagles. They were, and I don't think the score completely reflects it. I wouldn't say they dominated them, but they controlled that game, and I do think that they were more than 3 points better than them on the day. So I don't believe that the box score gives the full representation. When I say that South Carolina State controlled North Carolina Central, I'm looking at both sides of the football. I'm looking at that offensive line that kept the defensive line of the Eagles at bay. I'm looking at their ability to attack the secondary. Those wide receivers are having a field day. Eric Phoenix made a couple of plays with his legs that we'll get into on Monday on why I felt like this was his game where he absolutely stamped himself as the MEAC Offensive Player of the Year. But then defensively, they didn't let anything really outside of those big plays happen. And I want to point to Ashad Hall because Ashad Hall had 3 sacks on the day and arguably one of the top 5 plays of the night when he had a strip sack on Walker Harris, right? And at least 2 of the sacks by Hall were just hustle. I wouldn't even say hustle plays. They were intelligent rushes, right? We sometimes look at hustle plays where you're running all the way across the field, and this kind of falls in that category. But really, he just started his rush, realized the quarterback was coming up, stopped his pass rush upfield, and just came back. He just doubled back and got the quarterback. I don't know if I necessarily call this a hustle play, but it was a very intelligent rush because some guys are just coming upfield and you go end up running that arc and then you come around. No, Hall said, wait a minute, Harris is going up. I need to go that way. And he went ahead and took care of business. And one of those was a strip sack that if he doesn't get the sack, if he gets the sack and there's no fumble, I still think there's a very similar impact. But if Walker Harris gets 7-8 yards on a 3rd and 11, do you go for it? Maybe. Do they kick a field goal with Juan Velarde? I don't know how long his range is. That could be in play depending on who the kicker is, right? Because you're at the 35, about 7 yards will put you at the 28. So you're looking at a less than 50-yard field goal. Maybe you do that. It was 21-24 at that time. Like I said, it wasn't a full domination. It was just a controlling. There was points when I felt like it was going to slip out of their control. But overall, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And that's what they did. And when you control the game, they didn't just inch by, in my opinion, even if the score would suggest it. When you do that, When you beat North Carolina Central in the way that you did, where you clearly see that South Carolina State was the better team on that day on both sides of the football, I'm ready to say South Carolina State is the best team in black college football. And I really want to see a repeat of South Carolina State versus Jackson State in the Celebration Bowl, just so we can really prove who it is. Now, as we push forward, shout out to TC Taylor and Ashley Robinson, if I'm not mistaken. Both got new contracts, so shout out to them on that. As we push forward, though, we're going to look at Alabama State versus Alcorn. There's a lot on the line in this game out in Mobile, Alabama, and I want to break it down for you as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Now, our friends at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life, okay? Now, here's the thing. It takes a lot to go through all day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or even close games, right? Like, close games can take a lot of energy out of you, which is why they created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot is made for super fans like you and I, right? Because fans who are the first in the parking lot and the last to leave, we see you. We understand what you go through. Now, I'll tell you what gave me a bit of a fan fuel shot is that Caden High touchdown that I broke down to you from last night's game of the week, closing touchdown. That's how I felt about it, guys. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team that you root for, being a fan requires heart, prepping all day for a big tailgate, or ironing your jersey, however you do it, if people still iron their jersey. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy, available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen of the day, make sure that you're checking out Locked On College Football. Let's just break down the biggest action, right? Let's keep it simple today. Locked On College Football is going to let you get prepared for this weekend's action the same way that we are. We broke down our game of the week, but what about the other games that you need to watch? I'm going to kick it off with Alabama State versus Alcorn. I had a very good opportunity to go on the radio in Mobile, Alabama, where this game will be played, and talk about the Port City Classic. That is Alabama State versus Alcorn State. And that was a very fun one on I don't want to get the call letters wrong, but I think it's 105.5. That's the numbers, WNSP, if I'm not mistaken. Go ahead and check that out on demand if you want to hear the mouth of the South on a sports drive, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Now, with all that being said, I want to get into this game, and it was very easy for me to break down because you understand there is so much at stake in this matchup because both teams are sitting here looking at their SWAC championship opportunities from very similar yet very distinct lenses. For Alcorn, you're looking at Southern. Southern has a loss from last week. So now you guys are tied, but you don't have the tiebreaker. So with you not having that tiebreaker, with you going into this game, understanding that you need Southern to lose and for you to win, it's not mandatory that you beat Alcorn, but as you look at your schedule, it's not that many games left. Alcorn needs to win as many as they can and hope that Southern just loses one more than they do. Then as far as Alabama State goes, oh, no, this is mandatory. I don't think that Alabama State can lose another game. They do that, the season is over. So both of these teams are looking at this game with very, very important stakes because it's going to determine whether or not they can represent their division in the SWAC championship game. Alabama State loses, it's over, right? Even if you beat Jackson State's not going to lose 2 games, in my opinion. I don't think that FAMU is going to lose another game, in my opinion. So 2 losses is going to be one too many, at least one too many, right? As far as Alcorn goes, them and Southern both have really tough matchups. So we'll see how that goes. But the stakes are high. These games are important. These games mean something. These games have value. At the end of the day, these games have value because both teams are aiming for something larger. You can't say that in everyone, right? Like if I go through the SWAC game, I don't think everybody's fighting for something. This may be one of the few, if not the only game in which someone's fighting for something. FAMU versus Texas Southern, I would say that TSU is still fighting for something because they're at 2 losses right now. And Chris Dishman talked about it. He was like, hey, we're still in it. And that is the case. I think it's going to be very tough to beat FAMU, which is why I probably wouldn't put that high on the list. But it is a game in which everybody is fighting for something. And FAMU obviously is fighting for SWAC championship. Um, I'll give you the matchup that I'm really looking forward to in this game. And with all due respect to Sewell, right? The running back for Alcorn, I'm going to take him out of the run game conversation for a second. Because what I want to do is I want to point towards Xavier Vaughn versus the linebacking duo of the linebacking duo of DeMarcus Cunningham and Rico Dozier. When you look at Xavier Vaughn versus Rico Dozier and DeMarcus Cunningham, those are two athletic linebackers. And it makes me call back to the Grambling State game because you had Andrew Jones on Xavier Vaughn. And I think he did a really good job spying Vaughn and taking Vaughn's legs out of the Alcorn offense. Alabama State needs to aim to do the same thing, but they need to avoid one critical mistake that Grambling did. I still don't like this play call. The idea of blitzing both of your linebackers off the edge on a critical third down. I understand you want to get pressure, Grambling, but in that opportunity or in that chance, I don't think that I'm blitzing off the edge. It left the middle of the defense open, and Xavier Vaughn didn't hesitate to take advantage of it. He didn't. So with that, I'm looking at attacking Vaughn with my defensive lineman, specifically a guy like Traquan Thomas, who leads the conference in sacks. And then I'm going to spy him with my athletic linebackers. If I'm Alabama State, I'm aiming to take Xavier Vaughn's legs out of the equation. That's what I'm doing. Spy him with my linebackers. Attack him with guys like Stephon Young-Roll, with guys like Traquan Smith, one of the most prolific defensive linemen in the conference this year. And then I'm going to use my athletic linebackers to make sure that if Vaughn is able to get through, go ahead. Yeah, I still got Cunningham and I still got Dozier. That's the way that I'm looking at it. At least one of them. It ain't got to be both, obviously, but at least one of them. That's my mindset to it. On the other side of that, Kareem Key. Can you keep it going? Because to me, Kareem Key he was very surprising. He's very efficient. He's very quick with his decisions. He's a guy who I didn't expect to come out and do anything. Even though you can say he's not doing nothing difficult. He's just making quick decisions. You'd be surprised how difficult quick decisions are, right? You'd be surprised at how many quarterbacks are holding the football because they're looking for a play. I'm not searching for plays. I'm making the plays that are there. I'm reading. And the ability to make quick throws and make quick decisions a lot of times comes down to pre-snap reads. And I think that we don't necessarily appreciate the pre-snap reads a lot. But to me, that's what's made Kareem Key's year special. And it's only been 2 games. Like, don't get me twisted. But this will be a second start. Can he continue that? Because if he can, like, I had these conversations about him last week, and it's like, okay, maybe that's a bit premature because I'm going off his first start, his second game playing real action. But 3 weeks in a row, we're going to have a serious conversation about how he transforms that offense. Well, y'all are going to have a serious conversation. We had that already this week specifically. We had that conversation. I think that he plays complementary offense in a way that will really elevate this Alabama State offensive game, right? Like that's the way that I view it. And then obviously Jamari Holtzclaw. I think he's talented. He's going to be an engine. He's going to be a guy who really keeps this thing going. You don't necessarily think offense, but they have a couple of playmakers, and Holtzclaw is a freshman. I think he might be a freshman as well, or at least he's first year at Alabama State. I think they got some weapons, guys. I hate that this defense is a little bit older, but at the same time, they know how to reload. They'll get back to it. They lost Bubba, and they brought in Rico Dozier. That's how it goes, man. Alabama State knows how to collect defense. But yeah, in general, this is what I'm looking for. This is a big time game. Kareem Key, Jamari Holtzclaw, Malachi Bailey, Xavier Vaughn. These are star players that you need to be looking towards. Alcorn's offense has really slowed down recently. Are they going to be able to fix that? Who knows? We'll look at all of that. But I have a couple of more games that I want to point out to you. Nothing too major, just a couple of little factoids, and then one little basketball nugget to break down as we continue and wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. The NBA season is here in full effect, so is the NFL. The MLB is over, but the NHL is still rolling. So we got three of the big four still going on. UFC has events every weekend, it feels like. So there's a lot of things for you to make some money on, right? And if you're new to FanDuel, all you have to do is put down a $5 bet. You get $200 back in bonus bets. All you have to do is go to fanduel.com to get started. It's simple to me. You can go take advantage of MVP odds. You look at players in each game. You look at the games in general. I think the Saints versus Panthers, the Saints are 7.5-point favorites, I think. So if you're still rocking with my boys, I know I am. You go ahead and go to FanDuel and make a little bit of money on that. Derek Carr's first game back. How do you think he performs? It's little things like that, right? And you know what? If you feel like you know the game, then I want you to get a little bit of pocket change. All right. It's just that simple. Go ahead and go to fanduel.com and make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. It's about that time where we randomly start throwing basketball topics in there. I didn't want to do it on a Friday at like an entire segment, but I do want to highlight that Talladega College did upset Alcorn, and that's a major game, right? And I know we just started talking about Alcorn football, but then you also have Alcorn men's basketball, and they had a rough game in an exhibition, so it's not going to count towards the record. It's just an exhibition, but this is a big deal for Talladega. I would almost say it's a bigger deal for Talladega than it is a bad situation for Alcorn. I'll watch it, I'll monitor it, but knocking off a D1 team as an NAIA program, that's huge. That's huge. We'll see what Alcorn becomes as you go on, but it doesn't matter if Alcorn becomes a bad team, right? Even if Alcorn is a bad Division I team, let's say that. Let's say they're below average, maybe not trash, maybe not garbage, but maybe they're below average in the SWAC this year. You're still an NAIA program who knocked off a Division I team. That never changes, never does. And you know what? If Alcorn goes on to ball out, then we'll forget that they lost an exhibition to an NAIA team. So that's the way that I'm looking at this. As far as Talladega goes, where they really were dominant, where they were really winning was in the paint. They outscored the Braves in the paint. Excuse me. They outscored the Braves in the paint. And then also they had the big time rebounding advantage, rather. So Alcorn had 23 rebounds on the night. Talladega had 39. They had 29 defensive rebounds by themselves. So if you're just looking at Talladega's defensive rebounds versus the total rebounds for Alcorn, that still goes to Talladega. It tells you how much of a advantage, how much of a dominance in the paint that they had, because they didn't give up a lot of second chances. They didn't give up a lot of second possessions or opportunities for you to make up on your mistake. Instead, once you missed the shot, it hit the rim. Most times, 9 times out of 10, it was going the way of Talladega, right? Neither team had a lot of offensive rebounds, but you see a greater emphasis on dominating the defensive rebound, dominating the defensive boards by Talladega. Then I know we talk about the inside game, but outside, Keontae Cornelius was Talladega's leading scorer, and he did all his damage from 3. While everybody else was operating inside the paint and they were doing, Cornelius was knocking down 5 3-pointers. That's half of the amount of 3-point shots that they made all game long. So you're looking at all of that, man, and 5 3-pointers, that led to 16 points. He was the leading scorer of the day. Now to some football, and we're going to wrap it up here. Eddie George has never beaten UT Martin. And as we go into this pivotal stretch, and I can't stress it enough because it has a history component to it, but if you just look in the present, oh, well, sounds like you need this game to be an FCS playoff team. You're going to need to continue on this streak if you want to make it to the FCS playoffs. And mind you, they don't have a Celebration Bowl. They don't have that. All they have is the FCS playoffs. So that's exactly where they're trying to go. By the way, I think that Central is going to be headed to an FCS playoff. I do. We'll see where the rankings come out on Monday. But excuse me. So, Yeah, Eddie George needs to have his victory for the first time over UT Martin, and as he begins his 4-game stretch, 1-3 over the last 3 years, or 2 years, uh, 2 years. How long has Eddie George been there? 3 years. This is year 4. Um, that doesn't sound right, but anyway, every year he's been there, he's had a 1-3 record in this time frame. So, then lastly, you have Southern versus Alabama A&M. And then in that game, it's simple. I'm not even going to break it down too much, but Southern needs to win. Same way I say Alcorn. They are in a race with Alcorn in a game in a team. Excuse me. Southern is in a race with Alcorn, and they'll never face each other again. Each one is hoping that they can win out and the other one loses one game. If Southern can go into the Bayou Classic with a game up on Alcorn, they're going to be your SWAC West representatives. That's just likely what it's going to be. Unless Texas Southern is there. Well, yeah, if they have a game up on Texas Southern, they beat them too. So Southern is just trying to continue to stack up victories. And they don't have a FAMU left on the schedule. They don't have a Jackson State left on the schedule. So with Southern, you're just trying to get through all of these games, and it starts off with Alabama A&M. So we'll be back on Monday to break down some of the biggest storylines. There's no real game of the week, so I don't have to be married to anything. I can talk about whatever I want to on Monday. One will be Eric Phoenix and his MEAC Player of the Year performance over on Thursday. But outside of that, who knows where this will go? We'll see. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.